FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
We are back on the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, talking about foreign policy, and back with us is Ivan Eland, Senior Fellow and Director of the Center on Peace and Liberty in the Independent Institute, also author of Recarving Rushmore, Ranking the Presidents on Peace, Prosperity, and Liberty. The update of that book is being republished this fall. And Ivan, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, Kerry.
Sure. So you rank Obama 34th out of 41. And, hey, if he was in baseball, he'd still be a multimillionaire, right?
Well, he may be anyway after he gets out of office. But, 34th out of 41 isn't very good in the rankings. And so I think his foreign policy is actually better than most recent presidents. Now, people say, oh, they're aghast at that, but maybe damning by faint praise, because after Carter, the foreign policy kind of crept back into the interventionist mode. If you remember, after the Vietnam War, we had a Vietnam syndrome, and during the Ford and Carter administrations, there was hardly any military intervention, and then Reagan started ramping it back up with Libya, Grenada, Lebanon, etc. But even so, he was still a little reluctant to get into it. Of course, then the end of the Cold War happened, and then the first Bush and Clinton, especially Clinton, went hog wild after that. And then we had George W. Bush with all his problems. And so when you say that Obama is exhibiting some restraint compared to those people, that doesn't necessarily mean he's good. It just means he's better than recent presidents.
Well, you got to give Bill Clinton some credit here, because one of his major foreign policy victories was he eliminated the Yugo from the highways of the world. So that was a major accomplishment,
Well, he should be given credit for that, I guess. Yeah.
The National Highway Safety Institute couldn't do it. They couldn't get rid of it in Europe, but in one bombing run, he was able to accomplish that Herculean task, right?
There you go. Well, nothing like using military power to make the roads safer.
But interventionism, military might and all that, has really been a disaster for the country and the world, hasn't it?
Well, I think, we've seen that. And I think Bush had left Obama 2 quagmires, Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think, overall, Obama is winding down those, or has wound down the Iraq thing, but he basically unwound those wars. And so, but of course, the surge in Afghanistan, he did mainly to just satisfy the military, and he was he thought it would be fruitless. Well, Kerry said it best, John Kerry said it best after he left, during the Vietnam period, is no soldier wants to die for a lost cause. And I think, we got a lot more people killed in Afghanistan, so that was the wrong thing to do. But overall, Obama has wound down these wars, and also he is exhibiting some restraint in Iran and Syria and those places. Now, of course, he did do the Libyan thing at the French instigation, which really didn't need to be done, but at least he let the Allies for once take over. So we made a little progress in that, I guess. But of course, the Libyan episode was bad because now we have weapons all over that area, and also it sends a bad message to Iran that when you attack countries without nuclear weapons like Saddam Hussein or Muammar Gaddafi, and you take them out, and of course Gaddafi had given up his nuclear program. What is that signal for Iran? Whereas with North Korea, they have nuclear weapons, and we haven't done much at all. So, the message there to Iran was bad, but he is negotiating with Iran, and I think that's really the only thing to do. He's also got had arms control with the Russians, and he's also trying multilateral pressure to get the Russians, China, and North Korea to behave. And I think really that's the only thing you can do there. The U.S. can't really control everything in the world, and I think some of the foreign policy establishment in the United States hasn't figured that out. I think Obama does have good inclinations. He doesn't always do the right thing because he's a politician, but in foreign policy, I think he does have. He has realized that public opinion in Islamic countries does make a difference on the amount of terrorism that we have against U.S. targets overseas and here at home. And I also think that he's learned the Bush lessons from the Bush quagmires that we shouldn't exert a lot of ground troops. Now, Clinton eventually learned that lesson too, but of course, he had to learn it the hard way in Somalia and that sort of thing. So presidents do learn over time. The problem is, we seem to go through this learning cycle every so often when they forget the last disaster, like in Vietnam or Somalia or whatever, and then it takes a while for them to get back into the intervention. So we may be at a sort of something similar to a Vietnam syndrome right now, where the public is just not there with a lot of intervention. But give it 20 years when the public forgets about the Iraq and Afghanistan quagmires, the elite will again use that to go back into interventionism. That is, if we can afford it at the time, since we have a accumulating debt that's $17 trillion already.
So, Ivan, do you think that the country as a whole is ready to go back to a pre-World War I stance and just disengage from all this overseas interventionalism? Interventionism?
I think their gut is, but then the politicians say, well, look at what happened when we left Europe after World War I. We got Hitler, and it's all our fault or whatever. But I would say if there's any fault to the U.S., it's getting in World War I, which gave us Hitler in the first place. So, I think the historical narrative has to change for the public to accept the fact that the pre-World War I policy was probably the smartest policy that we had. But, of course, the elite, you see, the way American politics works on almost any issue is interest groups and the elite, the bureaucracies, have control over it unless the public gets involved. And when you have a major war like Iraq or Afghanistan go south, the public does get involved, and the public is involved right now. But when that sector goes away, then the public will not get as involved, and the interest groups will come in and take over the policy again, and the foreign policy elite will probably go back to intervention. So I think it takes a periodic catastrophe for the public to wake up and say, well, what's going on? But then it tends to be temporary until they forget about the last quagmires or catastrophes that we've had. Unfortunately, people don't pay as much attention to foreign policy because it's a mystery to them. They know something about education because they send their kids to school. They know something about health care because they go to the doctor or the hospital. They know something about transportation because they drive down the road in their car, but nobody knows, it's rare that people have been to embassies overseas, and many people haven't even traveled overseas. So, they don't know what our policy should be to country X or Y. They don't know how many missiles or tanks or ships we should have to adequately defend our country. It's just an unfamiliar area that makes, the interest groups and the elite able to capture the issue even more so than education or healthcare. And we saw how the vested interest captured the healthcare train, even when the public was aware of it because it was a big issue. But foreign policy is even worse than that because the public usually doesn't pay much attention to it.
Yeah, so how do we figure this out, and how do we stop from making the mistakes, keep making them? Because, as somebody said, the only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history, right?
Right. Well, I think, you really have to, educate the elite also. Hey, remember this, when we tried that, it wasn't such a great idea. I think also resources, if we continue down this road, we're going to end up like Britain and France. They were on the winning side of both world wars, but they lost their empires because they were just so exhausted by eventual victory. And we could end up like that because, if our economy, if our debt is so big, both because of domestic programs and because of defense spending, we could just run out of money for the empire, which is how most empires go into. So we could be a second-rate power like Britain or France is today, right? But I think what we need to do is we really need to entrench our security perimeter, which is really the whole world now. We're trying to do way too much and bring it home and recharge our batteries, recharge our economy, and that sort of thing. Put this money back into the private sector that we would spend on overseas adventures. And I think you got to educate the public. You got to educate the elite, and also there are resource constraints now that we didn't have before. But of course, the elite's answer to that is, well, yeah, we have a $17 trillion debt, but that doesn't matter because we're all Keynes, whatever. So it's nonsense, right?
Yeah.
So I think eventually the resource problem is going to cause some rethinking.
Yeah, really, it should have by now, but for some reason they've managed to keep on going and drawing this thing out. But after Afghanistan's over, well, we'll see then. Now, let's talk about this more when we return on the Financial Survival Network.
FSN Radio.
Do you have Medicare or health insurance through your employer? If so, listen up. The healthcare reform wasn't written to save the healthcare industry or even to lower healthcare costs. Shoot, it isn't even designed to insure the uninsured. It's just a temporary political byproduct. Like a flat rock you step on in a swiftly moving stream, Obamacare is just a means to an end. Want to learn more about Obama's ultimate objective? Then you'll want to review our latest research presentation found on oclies.com. In it, a health expert and industry insider explains what you think you know about caring for your health is about to drastically change in 2014. Plus, he details the simple steps you could take to save thousands of dollars per year in health costs. It's free for you to preview at oclies.com. Don't waste time. What you don't know about the healthcare reform could hurt you and your family.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
And we're back, and we've got Ivan Eland with us. So supposedly the troops are coming back from Afghanistan, and maybe this will be a time for reflection, Ivan, you think?
Well, I think so. I mean, they may leave a residual force in there. They tried to do that in Iraq, but of course the Iraqis resisted the imperial demand that our force was exempt from their laws. And of course we've got the same demand here, and also some other issues that are still outstanding. But Hamid Karzai will be out of power, and Abdullah will probably be elected, and I think he's more friendly to the U.S., so we may end up leaving some residual troops there, which I think is a mistake, but most of our troops will be out. And, of course, the ones remaining, if everything goes, down the tubes, of course, those troops are going to be in harm's way if they're left there. And I think, frankly, that's probably what's going to happen, but hopefully it won't. But anyway, I think for the most part we'll be out of Afghanistan, but there'll probably still be some special forces military trainers there.
Hey, and what about the whole resurgence of the drug trade? The line was that the Taliban stamped out the drug trade, the opium trade, and we went back in there, pushed out the Taliban, and then the drug trade came back. Was that true?
Well, to a certain extent, and I think also the Taliban kind of shifted, and now they protect the drugs since they get money off of it, and that fuels their insurgency. So they're the Taliban has been very pragmatic on the drug issue. But I think, and the U.S. has been, some parts of the U.S. government have been reluctant to crack down on the drugs because they think all the drug dealers will run to the Taliban and give them more support and more money. Because if you burn a farmer's field, they're going to probably side with the Taliban against the people who burnt their field. So, or they sprayed herbicide on it or whatever. So the U.S. does have an anti-drug program, but I think they kind of scaled it back a bit because they were worried that it was going to increase the Taliban thing. But the drug trade is back in Afghanistan, and they're really major export of opium, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, it is the leading cash crop there, right?
Right.
So,
well, it's about the only thing the country has to offer right now. There may be mineral resources if they could ever stabilize the country to get mining companies in there to fish them out. But I think the main export now is opium. Yeah.
So, yeah, and interestingly enough, before in the 60s, Afghanistan was a fairly developed country, kind of had its act together, and really was a productive country, especially compared to what it is now.
Yeah, and I think it had been progressive back in the 60s. They had women in the parliament and that sort of thing. But between our aid to the Mujahideen and of course the Soviet invasion that prompted that aid by the U.S., I think the outside powers have come in and ruined Afghanistan. And actually, I think we did an even worse thing, and that's made Pakistan destabilized. If we wanted to do something after 9/11, they should have just taken out the Taliban and then left. But what they did was they did a nation-building war, which has turned into a drone war, which has destabilized Pakistan. And of course, Pakistan may be the most dangerous country on the planet since it's a nuclear weapon state. But it also has a lot of its own terrorists and insurgents running around. And also the government, the military intelligence services of Pakistan have supported the Afghan Taliban that we're fighting. So we have the curious situation of our major ally, Pakistan, supporting the people that are fighting against us. And that's always mystified me. There's a new book out by a New York Times reporter that said, well, we were fighting the wrong enemy in Afghanistan. We should have really been fighting the Pakistani support structure, which of course we're unlikely to do. But my point is that this nation-building war in Afghanistan has stabilized Pakistan with nuclear power.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like we can do anything right in that part of the world, does it, Ivan?
Well, the problem is we don't really have the cultural awareness, and also we think everybody should have democracy, and being a republic and that sort of thing is really great. But if countries are ready for it, if they want it, not everybody wants democracy, believe it or not. Some people just want stability, and I think if you ask people in Iraq, some of them would say, well, this democracy thing is all well and good. We like voting and stuff, but the country's a mess. Everybody's getting blown up and everything, and maybe an authoritarian is better. So if you don't have stability or you can't feed your family, democracy may be a little higher up on the ladder, and you're not ready to climb up there yet.
It reminds me of that scene in Full Metal Jacket where the colonel gets all upset with Private Joker because he's got a peace symbol on his helmet, and he goes, inside of every gook, there's an American just waiting to get out. And that seems to be what our foreign policy is,
Right.
No insult intended. That's just a quote from the movie. That's what we think, that inside every person, regardless what country, there's an American just waiting to get out, and we have to somehow liberate them.
Well, George W. Bush really sort of said that when he said, well, democracy is a universal value and everyone should adopt it, and we're going to fight for imposing it on everybody. So that was sort of the mentality that had, at least rhetorically. And people look at that overseas, and they don't see that we're bringing democracy. They see that we're attacking them or bringing imperialist intentions. We're a foreign power, a superpower. They just want us to stay away. So I think you really need to let democracy bubble up when people are ready for it economically, politically, etc. You have to develop the culture before you get to democracy, rather than imposing the democracy top down. Military power, it's got to bubble up from grassroots or whatever. And so that's why we've been, and it may be different than our democracy, brand of democracy anyway, since they're foreign cultures, right? I mean, a lot of times we don't even know what the foreign culture is. And Afghanistan is a very mystifying place for Westerners and Americans. And it's going into Afghanistan was a colossal blunder, nation-building war. I mean, the British had failed 3 times. You can take over Afghanistan, but actually subduing it. Nobody has done that since Cyrus the Great lived before Christ, right? Recently the British failed 3 times. The British Empire failed 3 times in Afghanistan to do it. The Soviets failed once. But the Americans, we think, well, we're different. And of course, the same thing has happened to the Americans, right? Afghanistan has defeated another great power trying to subdue it.
Yeah, and like I said, the only thing we learn from history is we don't learn from history, right?
Right. And, that would be a simple thing to learn, all that failure, but it didn't stop us. We should have had a minimal footprint in Afghanistan. We wanted to take out the Taliban and fight Al-Qaeda, and we should have done it in the shadows. If you're fighting terrorism out in the daylight, you're just creating more terrorists than you're getting rid of. And we have to use military power instead of law enforcement and intelligence. Then we need to use special forces or CIA paramilitary people on a very small basis, like the successful raid against Bin Laden. And you can do drone wars, but these drone wars are unconstitutional. They're also, I think, at this point, killing people, civilians, and you don't get a break overseas when you kill civilians. People say, well, why does the Taliban have any support? They're brutal. I mean, we're nice. We give out the candy to the kids, but you're a foreigner. Even though most civilians are being killed by the Taliban in Afghanistan, we're still killing some civilians, and foreigners never get the benefit of the doubt. The Taliban are primarily local people, and they get the benefit of the doubt, even though they're brutal. So, and that applies to really any country that we go into. We're hitting from a disadvantaged position because we're foreigners.
Yeah, of course, and there's all sorts of tactical disadvantages to being a foreigner in a foreign land fighting an unpopular war among the locals. And initially, when we went in there was some positive perception by the locals because the Taliban were not popular among the people there. And we could have just been in and out and left. And
well, I mean, if we're not successful in Afghanistan when the Taliban rule was so brutal, just think of, and the Taliban was probably one of the more brutal regimes around. Then, and if it still has that much residual support and increasing because the U.S. is perceived as a foreigner, then any other country that we go into, which has a movement that's not authoritarian, or if they're like the guerrillas in El Salvador, the communist guerrillas, they deliberately didn't kill civilians, and the government we were supporting there had a worse human rights record than the communists.
Yeah.
Which is really hard to do, but it did. And therefore, if your opposition is smart, and the Taliban has smartened up, the Taliban is not killing civilians. They're directing their attacks against the military. They've learned. So that's why I think their support is so high and still growing, because they're locals and we're foreigners.
Exactly. So on that note, Ivan, thanks for being on. Just tell us where we find your work and about your book.
Well, you'll be able to get my Recarving Rushmore book on Amazon, and our website at the Independent is www.independent.org.
All right, excellent. And, of course, the link is on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter, and we will talk with you again real soon, Ivan. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kerry.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.